Welcome back to Workplace Wellness Strategies. I'm your host, Derek Anderson with the Elevate Performance Group. Let me start off today with a question. How often do you think about your company's culture and its impact on employees? Can you recognize which groups in your organization are tighter and seem to be more engaged, and put your finger on why? Chances are it has a lot to do with your frontline managers. So today's guest, we have Mr. Tom Shin. He's the owner of Build Better Culture, and he helps companies define their culture through setting up engagement strategies, coaching guidelines for managers or groups, and the skills necessary to get the most out of their teams. Tom, welcome in. It's nice to have you today.
Thanks for having me, Derek. I'm excited to jump into a great conversation we did this afternoon.
Likewise, man. So you obviously have a large background with this culture and building culture. So could you start by sharing some of your experiences, maybe early on some things you noticed that could be improved and how you determined to improve them, and then kind of where you're at today and what's made your team strong?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. People like to get a little bit of context on how people get to certain points in their career. I spent a bulk of my career on the HR side, less on the manager coaching side of things, and saw over the years companies that could use or benefit from some leadership training. I was very fortunate to participate in a great program a couple decades ago. We're not going to get into the exact number, but it led me down this path of, yeah, I think I can affect change here. I can make people uh, have clearer images of what it might look like at the back end of investing in themselves, investing in their own learning, and investing ultimately in their people. And so a few years ago, I started this as a side hustle, meaning just to help onesie twosies here and there, and eventually added a couple of clients, some individual coaching clients, and have added a few more along the way. I've worked with a couple of corporations where they want to invest in these team-oriented style engagements, meaning help us with better communication skills, help us be a little bit more in touch with what our audience might need, whether that's in a production team, in an engineering team, in a sales team. Really, the industry and the vertical are somewhat a level playing field. So I'm excited to bring this passion and energy of mine into helping people see, yeah, you can be a little different. You can have some of your metrics and performance piece, but have some of the warm fuzzies too. It's meaningful to everyone else.
Totally. And bringing up culture and communication, it's such a common, reoccurring topic on our podcast. But also, what's coming up more is inclusivity. So, what have you noticed with inclusivity amongst companies, and what kind of makes people feel neglected or put on the outskirts? And then what does Build Better Culture do to establish programs to make people feel included in their workplace?
Yeah, I think inclusivity is coming up more and more in the entire diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, where we as business leaders bring in this next generation of, we'll say, emerging leaders or high potentials or so forth, realize that we could be doing better to prepare the workforce of tomorrow. It's not just about teaching them the skills, but to bring them along this journey where they understand how they impact things. I have this story all the time. Our kids ask us all these questions. So I say our kids, whether they're 6 or 8 or 10 or 15, they ask questions. They need to understand why. And it drives parents nuts. But along the way, the parenting styles have shifted over the decades where we ultimately provide this. You want to give participation trophies to kids coming through the grade school so that they feel included and they feel like they have a chance at winning things and be part of the greater community. We created this 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And now people are complaining, well, we made the bed, now we got to sleep in it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just every generation changes a little bit, has slightly different needs, and weaving a workplace where your people feel more secure in sharing information, being part of the solution, knowing that they can be their true selves, whatever that looks like, extrovert, introvert, somewhere in the middle, sharing different nuances about their personality, their behavioral style, etc., while they can still continue to be successful, is only going to make them happier in the workplace, more secure, more confident. And ultimately, that leads to greater productivity, greater team engagement, more shared purpose about what the company's about. And I try to connect this back to the engagement element where you have your culture, that's the behaviors that you're illustrating in an organization. The engagement strategy is how you're connecting or helping your employees, these people that you've brought on this inclusive journey, help them connect with what your company's all about. They all have a different reason for it. Let
Hmm.
it shine, let it flourish.
Yeah, I think questions are a good thing. That's a positive thing. You want people to ask questions regardless of child, teenager, adult. Like when I'm working with someone for their physical and mental goals, I want them to ask me questions because that shows me their motivation or their desire to reach their mountaintop. Where if not, right, they're kind of not performing in their program or feeling neglected or not interested. So is that something you notice when you go into a company is you're trying to engage with them and help them reach their personal goals, but also teach them, how to get there and the method that works best for them.
That's key, right? Everybody learns differently, everybody applies different information, just as managers do, their employees do. And so when you can help a manager, I've seen this several times where I've seen them start to connect the dots. They're like that brief little pause or aha moment where they realize how I said this, how I positioned this, how I responded or reacted proactively, reactively, positively, negatively impacts what happens on the other side, right? That employee will either get more jazzed about it or defeated and beat up. So you have an opportunity, right? It's one thing to sugarcoat things. You don't need to sugarcoat grown-ups. You can give them kind, tactful feedback on things that are constructive and help them get better with things. Here's how to improve. Here's some next steps. Here's some homework I want to send you home with, right? Homework wasn't just in grade school and high school and college.
Right.
You have it in real life too. Same thing in a fitness routine. I was explaining to somebody I was working with the other day. She's relatively new to this scene and trying to help her with opening up. She's got some hip impingement, and I just try to reinforce with her. Practice these couple of stretches, 30 seconds at a time, switch sides, do these two or three in succession. End of your workout, start your workout, just get a little more loosened up. It needs some more stretching, some more movement, and you need to strengthen different components of your body you're just not used to using. And so it applies in just about every facet of life.
Yeah, and taking that example, like you start working on your hips and you notice a difference, that might propel you to the next level of, oh, I want to know the background of this. Like, how does this work? Why does this make me feel better? You learn more about the body, become more interested, and continue to progress on your journey. So it's great to have that information. If I may ask, man, when you work with an HR manager or an executive or anyone that you try to help, do they all have a fear sometimes of like afraid to ask their team of what they can personally do better to help them out, to make them feel more included and engaged? And is that ever something that you have to tell them it's okay? You can step outside of your shell and ask those questions and they'll give you honest feedback.
It's something I encourage. I had a great client earlier this year who was asking good questions, really about embracing the learning opportunities that one-on-one coaching provides. And so she was very open to it. I made some suggestions. Here's an idea. You could try this. This could be part of your homework. It doesn't need to be. It's a comfort zone. Some people want to be a little bit more vulnerable with areas of improvement than others. There's this fear amongst the higher up you go in a hierarchy of an organization that you have to have this armor on. You have to be perfect. You can't show any blemish or any dents or anything that you're not good at because then people won't respect you. Nothing could be farther from the truth, though, right? You think about
Right.
from a fitness regimen, elite athletes are continuing to strive to get better, right? Beginner athletes are they see that elite athlete like, I can't be that. Like, you don't need to be, right? You just need to be one more muscle strand stronger, 1 degree more flexible. It's baby steps and it's a long journey. And that senior level leader has a harder time swallowing that pill a lot of times. But when you see that take shape, when you can ask them, I want you to consider this, ask your people for feedback, put it out there to say, I'm working on this path to improvement. If you see me illustrate some of these behaviors, I invite you to bring that up and bring my awareness, either one-on-one or in a group setting. You can pull me aside afterwards and say, hey, you were a little bit like this before. And it doesn't need to be name calling or finger pointing. If you invite them for that feedback, they will be more apt to share with you and join you in that journey. You're like, how do I get some of that special sauce? Because I see the difference that you're making and the investment that you're making in yourself, and I want some of that. And it seeds so many great opportunities for learning and development across the board.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's really hard to teach, as I'm sure you've experienced. Like talking about going to corporate or in the gym or in your personal life, it's always best to be yourself. And a lot of times, people don't really know who they truly are. It takes a lot of self work. But with the company culture, if everyone is working towards their own personal goals and can communicate on that, that makes the team stronger. It makes you feel more free and inclusive to share your goals with others. But a lot of times, it's a fear because it's not provided, it's not known amongst the team. So, like using the example of telling someone, you kind of did this right now, it could have been better if you did this, they might feel attacked if you don't have that culture established. So, what are some ways that you go into a team and build that culture, especially in male dominated workforces? I've noticed with those teams, like, there's always people trying to take over, kind of butting heads or not collaborating like they should. So, do you have any special strategies that you go into a team and kind of portray to build that team culture?
You have to do a little prep work ahead of time with situations like that. Who are the egos in the room versus the ones that are really willing to share and embrace moving forward? You also have to be much like if you listen to speaker panels, there are sometimes some people who monopolize the microphone. I'm guilty of it. So I'll be the first to fall on that sword. And I'll tell folks, cut me off when you need to cut me off because I will keep rambling and rambling and rambling. But if you set some expectations, I find that if you have a person who tends to ramble, you give them a little stopwatch. You're like, you get 3 minutes, and then I'm going to turn your mic off, or I'm going to cut you off, or flag something at you. Just that say, hey, your turn's up. I think if you can have some open, candid conversations with folks as you start to work with them, you out there who coach in any facet, business, fitness, etc., it's one of those elements. I want to be able to feel safe calling you out when you're misbehaving, quote unquote. We'll use that as a phrase. Uh, but I need you to embrace that. So if I have a Nerf, I don't know, a Nerf ball that I'm going to toss at you when, you've gone over your time, realize I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just letting you know you need to be more succinct and we need to tail off and let somebody else have a turn. So there's lots of little tricks and things like that. Most oftentimes when I have a group in front of me where it's several people that I'm working with, it's the rest of the team that'll speak up and say, yeah, you're really like that. You need to, we're going to work with you on that. And I'll invite them to be part of that decision. It's a group collective. They want to all collectively improve and get better and stronger as a team, especially as leaders. I can picture different faces around the room in those scenarios. And I try to think, all right, this is how so-and-so would have treated this, or this is how this person would have treated this. Here's some examples how you can work around this or work with this person to help them curtail some of the behaviors they don't want to exhibit and reinforce. It's that positive reinforcement model. If you need to keep a jar of M&Ms like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, hey, great, that will do it.
Yeah, have you ever noticed, like, you're working with a team, let's say, of 8 employees versus 50? Does your strategy change into getting everyone included and finding out their pain points before you can really get started? What are some of the main roadblocks in the difference of the two team sizes?
Yeah, smaller teams or smaller organizations definitely have different challenges. There's not as much of a hierarchy. It's everyone reports to one. It's quite a different dynamic, and you really need more of a presence from the top down than you do with bigger organizations. It's important across the board. Like if whoever I'm working with, top line leadership has to advocate and be behind the idea of learning and development, coaching, guidance, culture, engagement, all of it. They have to be behind it. But with small groups, it's so much more important that everyone sees that they have a voice at the table and they can speak up. It's that whole Brene Brown vulnerability and transparency conversation where you have to feel safe. You have to be more open. I think that's one of the big positives I saw coming out of that pandemic. Our generation today, and even folks who are at different generational spots, feel more comfortable sharing stories about their own mental health, anxiety, depression, all sorts of different things. You see much more information about people sharing neurodivergent patterns in their own behaviors. And companies that embrace it and set the stage, you still have expectations to meet, but let's work around some of this. You need a little bit more space, right? We didn't know that before because you weren't comfortable sharing. Now you are. We're opening the door to create a better environment. Doesn't mean you have to change everything. But if you have conversation about it, you can set some framework and say, hey, yeah, let's pick this one thing. That's kind of wrap around the long-winded answer to your question. I pick one thing that they want to work on. Let's start there. You can't change 17 things all at once. You have to pick one or two things. If each person picks a task and hones in on that, you create those habits, the Stephen Covey seven habit kind of methodology. Once it's become habit, then you add the second one or the third one, and so on and so forth.
Glad you brought that up because you're probably the same as me in this aspect where as coaches, we have to be open about our experiences because that kind of lowers the person's wall, lets you know you're a real person, and then they can trust you and get that information to you, and then you can best help them. It lets them know that we care about you and your success. Yeah.
I'm sure you run into this a lot where you have, the entry level athlete coming in trying to just be a little healthier, getting about the house, moving about, getting some flexibility, and they see somebody who's, 6 stages past them. I said it took them years to get there. Right? Don't think about that. You're not competing with anybody. Yeah, maybe on a tennis court you're trying to get points, but in the gym, it's, for me and how I have conversations with folks, get a little more flexible, get a centimeter lower, feel a little bit better about that movement, like we were just saying, and just focus in on your own growth. Don't worry about scaling. Scaling's there to help you. There's an intent to workouts that get your blood pressure up, get your heart moving and get your body moving and used to some of that cardio, those cardio elements. It's the same in the business world.
Yeah, exactly. No matter what your goals are, where you're at in life, you have to focus on you. If you're worried about anything else, it's just going to kind of set you back, put you a few steps back of where you would be or could have been, for sure.
Yeah, you're either going to hurt yourself physically or in a business environment, you're going to create a reputation for yourself of not listening to yourself, not listening to your team. And eventually everything you say becomes Charlie Brown teacher.
So when you go into a team, I know you want to boost their morale, as I do. So how do you go about the research of figuring out where they're currently at and what could improve? Is it something that you just can kind of feel when you walk in the room? Or is it through meeting with each person individually? Or what are your tactics on that?
So I do use some tools. One of the tools I use is a culture talk audit system, and that helps me identify some patterns and behaviors in different people so I can see and help them validate their communication and behavior styles. So I'll see somebody who's more gregarious, more goal setting oriented versus the fact finder, the one that has to have all this research. And so you start to see some patterns and you understand when I present something to this personality type or somebody who has this as a strong sense of them, then I need to adapt. Much like leaders need to adapt to their employees. That's kind of the whole point of that is help them learn how does somebody else need to be communicated with. And I'll use my wife as my prime example. Like my brain shuts off some days where the filters just go off. And I'm sure I'm not the only one guilty of this, but she'll call me out on it. She goes, "You don't talk this way like da 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 da." And I'm like, "You're right. I'm wrong. We'll fix it." And so you have to be able to fall on the sword so many times to affect change.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because everyone does learn differently. And it's such a neglected aspect of coaching in business, in sports, whatever it may be, right? Someone might be more audio or visual or all the different types of learning there are. And it's up to us as coaches, as managers, to take the time to learn each person and what best impacts them because providing the information in that way that they best resonate with will get the most out of them. So it's really important to sit down, meet with them, and find out what works the best. So to anyone listening, what are some measures that companies can take to improve morale in-house? I know obviously that you can do it better and implement it for them, but if they wanted to get started right now, what would you suggest?
I would suggest the first and easy way. This is cheap. Get a mailbox, get a cardboard box, write suggestions on it, right? Lead by example, put some of your own in there. Put that suggestion box up. Take some suggestions. Have a town hall meeting, go over the questions. If somebody throws a really silly one like, we want ice cream on every second Tuesday of the month, all right, have a little fun with it, right? You can put a little tongue in cheek. Nothing has to be that serious. But there'll be some suggestions in there that just don't make sense. But if you don't acknowledge them and just say, oh, we're not going to do that. Oh, we're not going to do that. That tells them that their suggestions aren't valuable and you just don't want to hear areas of improvement. You have to answer the suggestions. Somebody wants you to spend $30,000 on a software package because it's better than the $10,000 one. Okay, now you can explain. Well, for us to invest $30,000 there, that additional $20,000 difference might be half of a person's salary or a change in the benefit provider, meaning everybody gets a higher deductible on their insurance plan. All sorts of implications where we'll take this into consideration in our next cycle. But if we're going to invest that, we also need to sort of measure what the return on that is. So if you want to step up and help us kind of collect some of that data, let's have a conversation about it. And if it's something practical and easy to weave in, great, let's put this in again, one thing at a time. We want a little bit better lunch program. All right, let's talk to our lunch vendor if you have one of those, just as examples.
And you answered both sides of the equation right there, because if the suggestions are anonymous, the participation rate is going to be higher, right? Because they won't feel as intimidated, and you need the rate to be high to get the return of it. But also on the management side, acknowledging them, not brushing things off, really listening and actually finding out ways that you can be better. And that ultimately, right, leads to higher productivity, higher retention, and just an overall great morale within the team.
Right. And you can do this electronically. You can use some Google Forms. But again, the paper cardboard box, if you're physically in the office, great. Online, some people get a little skeptical about surveys and are you collecting my data? Or are you going to figure out it was me that said that's really hard in smaller groups? You have to have some level of trust. But if you put the suggestions out there and people feel safe sharing, you're going to get good information to play with. If you have a trust issue, then you need to dive into that and figure out how do we rebuild trust. And that's a whole different conversation.
Is that something that you do to improve the return on investment of working with you? And is kind of making it anonymous, providing the management back greater detail than they would get on their own?
Yeah, that's a big concern for people filling out engagement surveys, and that's one of the reasons why companies will enlist an outside resource like me or anybody else, or if they're buying a software package, is that anonymity factor to be able to say we have an outside person collecting this information. Yes, we want demographic information to know for participation purposes, meaning we're going to get 30% participation or 80% participation. That's important to know. And you also kind of want to know in that regard, what level of the organization. If your managers aren't participating, that's a problem, right? They should be leading the pack. I took my survey team. Please go make sure you do this. It's anonymous. Here's where it goes. You can look at the vendor and kind of validate things if you don't trust it, but please go take this. You can use some online tools. And so I think that's really valuable when you get into engagement surveys. You have to be very pointed about what you're asking, meaning don't ask 70 questions. No one wants to answer that.
Right.
20 maybe. It really kind of depends on what you're after. If you're looking for a global survey, you can't survey people to death. They get bombarded by it. I mean, look at all the social media quizzes that they have to take just to kind of keep up with the Joneses. So just keep it focused. Sometimes you'll want to enlist that outside service to help you with that if there's some trust issues. Even if there's not, it's good to have somebody validate information because they're going to look at it from a different lens than you will as a business leader, just because they're not biased by what they've seen for the last 10 or 20 years.
And asking from a perspective of leadership as opposed to superiority, right? I feel like maybe a lot of managers, because they're on the next level or they're running a team, maybe lose sight of the fact that they're all on the same team working for the same company. So lowering those questions down and making them more detailed and specific to each person probably produce a better return.
Yeah, again, what I'll see successful organizations want to implement is maybe they want a survey this half of the year around inclusion, right? Are we being inclusive? Are we putting the right type of material in front of everyone, giving them resources, and actually practicing what we preach? Next summer, maybe we put a different survey oriented around something else completely. Maybe it has to deal with comp and benefits. And are we paying the right amounts? Are we being fair? Are our wages comparable to what you're seeing out there? Because half the employee base of any organization is looking at other jobs, and they're looking at the salary points. Here in New York State, it's easy, right? You have to list your pay rates on your job posts, so it's pretty quick to figure that stuff out. So again, it's be very focused about what the objective is and have a strategy around it. Don't just do the one and done. Have a plan. One in first quarter, one in third quarter, and just kind of build this cycle of information and share back what you're finding so that people know, hey, my information matters. You're doing something with it, and you're telling me that you're doing something with it, and the follow through is there.
You want to keep your team strong for as long as possible. I believe the national retention rate is about 2.5 years, which is nothing like it used to be. And every time you lose someone, right, that's a whole nother element of work, like the onboarding and hiring process and training process. Then the rest of your team having to pick up for that missing position to fulfill their responsibilities. Do you happen to know what the retention issue is or the rate is in New York State by chance?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I can tell you the cost of losing an employee is anywhere between 50 and 150%. Depends on the role, depends on the skill and how long they've been there, the knowledge they have. But even at 50%, if you're talking a $50,000 employee, they're one of 10 employees. Can you afford to lose two or three of them? Right? What's that do to your organization? Now,
Yeah,
not only have you lost the talent, you've burdened your workforce to pick up the slack, like you said, but now you got to replace them, train them up. That's costly time, right?
big
You're drawing
time.
those people away from their core tasks for 3, 6 months or more, and the pressure just builds and people get burnt out. And sometimes you may cause other people to leave in the wake.
Yeah, it's a big impact for sure. 2 or 3 people is massive for a small team. Have you ever gone into a company and suggested health and wellness programs and how that could be a benefit?
It's a huge benefit. I'd like to deal with, I've got a lot of friends in the broker and insurance space, and so we try to introduce people to each other where we can. But that health and wellness, whether it's the physical well-being, the mental well-being, they're all great parts of the conversation because it shows compassion and care. It shows that you're not just a number. People want you to be healthier. Again, it doesn't mean you're going to look like Adonis. It just means you're going to learn how to better choose the vegetables that you're buying, look at the ingredient labels in the store, consider having a meditation moment from time to time just to kind of recenter yourself. There's a woman that I know up here in the Capital District. She does slow breath works, and so she's really focused on intentional breathing to help people settle down and really center themselves and be more productive and happier in life. And so there's all sorts of different avenues where that's really, really valuable. And you'll find when you survey organizations, health and wellness is a big part of it, about the things that they want.
Yeah. And then when it's not generalized and it gets into more of their specific goals, because that's where you really need people to use it if you want a return on that investment. So catering to each person's individual needs, especially with a smaller team, can help big time. Keep them around.
What I've seen some people do is they'll allocate a budget. Hey, we're going to give you sort of a reimbursement program. You can use it for a gym membership. You can use it for, a personal coach, meaning you could use it for maybe you want to go to regular counseling sessions just to kind of keep things at check and know where you're at with things. Some people just need to talk, and that's great. Helps you kind of set aside, this is me worrying about something too much, and this is, okay zone, and separating some of those things. So I think having a bucket that people can draw to if you're a smaller organization, it shows that flexibility, and you're addressing, not everybody wants to be fit. Not everybody wants to have that counselor to talk to. Not everybody wants to, contribute to the animal society, etc., but they can kind of pick and choose with that budget. And so you're addressing that in a different way.
That's great. Well, Tom, thank you so much. I admire your work at Build Better Culture. Please tell the audience where they can find you, drop your website, or anything you need.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on, Derek. The best way to find me, you can locate me on LinkedIn. I'm all over there. I'm one of those people that posts probably way too often, but I try to share some good information. The other place that you can find me is on my website, which is buildbetterculture.com. 3 simple words with a .com on the end. Build Better Culture.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to being in touch with you. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. I will catch you next time.